order. By agreement, the application for leave to appeal is postponed sine die, no order as to costs. Court adjourned.
So sine die is a Latin term meaning without a day, and this indicates that the matter has been suspended indefinitely with no date set for resumption. And speaking on behalf of both sides, Mr. Muswani explained that the request was made due to the Lungu family's application to the Constitutional Court of South Africa for leave to appeal the Pretoria High Court's August 8th judgment, which authorized the repatriation.
Deputy Judge President, as you would recall, on Friday when the matter was postponed, it was postponed on the basis that the parties were going to endeavor to resolve the matter, but they've not been able to do so. But what has happened is the family has since filed an application for direct access in the Constitutional Court. And on those bases, the parties have agreed to allow the Constitutional Court process to unfold. And in the circumstances, we have agreed that by agreement between the parties that this application for leave to appeal be postponed sine die.
So this postponement now clears the way for the South African Constitutional Court to begin its own hearing process on the matter. Now, as of this morning, the Constitutional Court of South Africa had not yet set a date to hear the Lungu family's application. Now, on the line, we have historian and senior lecturer at South Africa's Stellenbosch University, Dr. Sishuwa, joining us to discuss the Edgar Lungu burial impasse. Doc, good morning and welcome to the Red Rod Breakfast.
Good morning, Peter, and good morning, listeners.
Good morning to you. And first things first, what's your assessment of how the Zambian government has handled the death of former President Edgar Lungu?
Well, I think that the government have handled Lungu's death very poorly overall when you look at how the whole matter started to how we got here. You know, we know that the relationship between Lungu and President Hichilema was fractious. But following his death, Peter, the president missed several opportunities, in my view, that presented themselves for him to rise above personal feelings and emerge as the bigger person. I can highlight a few examples of these missed opportunities. First, after former President Lungu died, and in the spirit of unity, the president could have gone to the PF Secretariat, where the main opposition party, Lungu's party, were grieving from, to plead with the PF to say, look, I know we are political opponents, but we are not enemies. In difficult times like this, let us put our differences aside and mourn together. Instead, he set up a parallel funeral venue without consensus and missed, in my view, the opportunity to use a sorrowful moment to build bridges with his political rivals, to subordinate his ego to the grieving collective, and to rally people above narrow partisan considerations. So that was the first missed opportunity.
Well, Doc, wouldn't you say the parallel funeral was the one at the Secretariat and not the one set up by government?
When people died, Peter, and they set up a funeral home, it's not for you and I to determine where they should mourn from. It's for us to go and support them where they have gone. If you had gone there and then negotiated or discussed with them, as I suggested, the outcome would have been entirely different, because the PF set up their funeral, meeting venue first. But the president didn't go there. He simply set up a parallel venue. Consensus could have been established, as I said. That's a missed opportunity. The second one was that when differences emerged between the family and the government over the repatriation of Lungu's remains from South Africa to Zambia, the president could have sent people who he enjoyed the trust and respect of the family to negotiate. But he sent the likes of Leslie Mbula, Enoch Kabendele, Mulambo Haimbe, people who had made bashing Lungu in life a pastime. You know, even after his death, some of those he sent to South Africa were fresh from saying hurtful stuff about Lungu. So that was a mockery, and I think their arrogance did not help matters. That was the second missed opportunity. The third one was that when the family said Lungu did not want President Hichilema to attend the funeral, the president could have pledged to stay away from the funeral out of respect for the grieving family, in my view. Peter, the death of Lungu is primarily a family issue, and the family should have been allowed to have a final say on all matters, including matters relating to the disposal of his remains. As you know, after Lungu's death, the family disclosed that the deceased had told them that in the event of his death, and largely because of how poorly he felt the government had treated him in life, he didn't want his successor anywhere near his funeral. Now, what the president should have done is to facilitate the wishes of the family to be realized. And those wishes were clear and simple, that President Lungu did not want President Hichilema anywhere near his funeral. And I think that listeners are aware that this is not isolated. The expressed wish bears a striking resemblance to what happened in the United States, for example, in 2018, when the Arizona Senator, what's his name, John McCain, told friends and family that he didn't want President Donald Trump, with whom he had a very, very turbulent relationship, to attend his funeral when he died. And indeed, when McCain died, I think in August 2018, Trump did attend his funeral out of respect for the McCain family. But he nonetheless accorded the late senator a state funeral and allowed the vice president at the time, Mike Pence, to preside over it. So unless he has undisclosed personal interest in the funeral of his predecessor, President HH, in my view, could have done the same. I don't understand what is preventing the president from publicly committing that he will be nowhere near. Yes,
please, we'll just have to break for a few seconds. We're just getting interruption here, so we'll just break for a few seconds. Just stay on the line for us this morning. In case you're just joining us, this is the Red Hot Breakfast right here on Hot. The Heat is on. It's your 7:40 on Hot. The Heat is on, and you're listening to the Red Hot Breakfast. Joining us via phone this morning, we have Dr. Sishuwa. He is a senior lecturer at South Africa's Stellenbosch University. He's a historian as well, joining us on the Red Hot Breakfast. We were just having a conversation with Dr. Sishuwa, and he was just breaking down to us his assessment of how the Zambian government has handled the death of former President Dr. Edgar Chagwa Lungu. You're making your third point, Doc. Can we just pick it up from there?
Yes, I was making the point that when the family said former President Lungu didn't want President HH to attend the funeral, the president could have pledged, in my view, to stay away from the funeral out of respect for the grieving family. The death of President Lungu is primarily a family issue, Peter, and the family should have been allowed to have a final say on all matters, including matters relating to the disposal of his remains. Now, as you know, after his death, the family made it clear that the deceased had told them that in the event of his death, and largely because of the turbulent relationship he had with President Hichilema, Lungu had made it known to them that he didn't want his successor anywhere near his funeral. So what the president should have done, in my view, is to facilitate the wishes of the family to be realized. And those wishes were simple, that Lungu didn't want President HH to attend his funeral. That expressed wish bears a striking resemblance to what happened in the US in 2018, when then Arizona Senator John McCain told his family that in the event that he died, he didn't want President Trump to attend his funeral. And indeed, when McCain died in August 2018, Trump didn't attend his funeral out of respect for the family. Nonetheless, he accorded the late senator a state funeral and allowed the vice president to preside over it. So, unless President Hichilema has undisclosed personal interest in the funeral of Lungu, he could have done the same, in my view. So I don't understand, Peter, what is preventing the president from publicly committing that he will be nowhere near the body or the funeral as requested by the grieving family. Doc. He loses nothing, in my view, by staying away, because it's bizarre and illogical to force oneself onto a funeral program where the grieving family has made it very clear that your presence is unwelcome.
Okay.
If the objective is to accord the former president the honor of a state funeral, the president could have done so without making his presence a precondition for granting that honor to his predecessor, because the state is the system. It's not an individual. When Lungu's family made it clear that they didn't want him, he should have delegated the responsibility of officiating at the funeral to another state official, such as the vice president. I don't think the family would have protested. And it was the failure by the president to publicly commit that he would stay away from the funeral if held in Zambia that forced the family to consider burying him in South Africa. But in my view, Peter, had the president not forced himself on the funeral program, Lungu would have long been buried by now in Lusaka, and this court case we are saying wouldn't have happened.
Yes, Doc.
But by insisting that,
can we get to the Zambians themselves at the end of the day, Doc, here, because How do you think Zambians reacted to this funeral dispute? You made some interesting points on your X account about how the issue has exacerbated the country's regional and political polarization. Please tell us more about that.
Well, to be clear, the fault lines have always been there, Peter, but the burial place has worsened the political and regional polarization. Politically, and if you have carefully noticed, who supporters and PFO officials, particularly those based in the country, have largely been muted in their response to the undignified row between the family and the perhaps, in my view, perhaps because they live in constant fear of the repressive laws that each of them has either enacted or dusted off from colonial times to police free speech. So it's therefore difficult to accurately read what the ordinary Zambian truly thinks about the issue because of this general climate of fear that the government has instilled in the population. In contrast, however, officials and supporters of the ruling party have been unrestrained and vocal in verifying Lungu and his grieving family, even in death. And that includes the Attorney General, Muliro Kabesha, who recently stated that the government is prepared to bury Lungu without the involvement of his family. If the family, for example, boycotted the funeral, should the South African courts in favor of the Zambian state. Now, such reckless statements, Peter, are culturally insensitive. They also undermine the government's claim that its actions are motivated by the desire to accord Lungu a dignified burial, because how can it be a dignified burial if you're excluding, or you're prepared to exclude, the family that is mourning? But they also indicate that political consideration rather than public interest are the key drivers at play here, and ultimately worsen the existing political division. There's no law, Peter, that gives the government primary responsibility for burying a dead person, except in the cases of unclaimed bodies. But even in there, they have to issue a statutory instrument, so there has to be a process that must be followed. But I do also think that the dispute over the funeral has intensified regional divisions, because even before Lungu died, there existed sharp national divisions expressed on regional lines, with many people feeling that President Hichilema was ill-treating and marginalizing people from regions that previously voted for Lungu, such as Eastern, Luapula, Muchinga, and Northern provinces. Now, the fact that Lungu managed to hold to his support base after losing the 2021 election meant that his death was always going to be a polarizing moment. But historically, if you go back if you look into the past, funerals of former presidents in Zambia have served as rare moments of national unity, presided over, of course, by the incumbent president. The difference this time, Peter, is that the former president, at the time of his death, was back in active politics, had a fractious relationship with his successor, and partly because of that poor relationship, didn't want his successor to be anywhere near his funeral. But the president seems to think that staying away from his predecessor's funeral diminishes his personal standing, or deny him the opportunity to show care for Lungu in death that he didn't show in life. And that has really exacerbated these divisions, because rather than rising above them, as I was saying earlier, his conduct has really made the situation worse.
Dr. Sishuwa, let's bring in the point that Attorney General Muliro Kabesha has argued that a state funeral is required for presidents by law. He cited Dr. Kaunda's court case. What do you make of Mr. Kabesha's assessment of the law?
With due respect, Peter, I think the Attorney General's assessment of the law is incorrect, because the Kaunda case never resolved the question of who, between the family of the deceased and the state, holds the ultimate say on the funeral of a late former president. If you remember, the genesis of the Kaunda case was the decision by the Lungu administration to bury former President Kaunda at Imbas Park against his wishes, which were left to his family, that he be buried next to his wife, late wife Betty, at their family farm when he dies. Now, in response to that decision by the government, the Kaunda family filed an urgent application in the High Court, seeking leave to commence judicial review against the state over the specified decision. The family, in my view, correctly argued that every decision that the government makes must be governed by law. And since there is no law, currently at least, that obliges the government to bury the remains of my president at Imbas Park, the decision, they said, must be declared now and void for want of authority. They also asked the court, if you remember, to order the state to release the remains of KK, because he died, I think, at Mainasoko, so that he could be buried in accordance with his wishes, and further requested that the court should suspend the decision to bury him until after hearing the arguments from both sides in the main matter. Now, the High Court judge at the time, I think it was Wilfred Muma, he sat on that urgent application until after burial had taken place, I think on 7 July. Following the burial, Muma ruled that he was not persuaded that the family had a good case and thus refused to grant them permission to commence judicial review against the state. The state didn't even bother to appear before the judge. Now, although the High Court judge gave the family leave to appeal against his decision, the family chose not to do so because doing so would have been an academic exercise, Peter, since the action they sought to prevent, which was the burial of Kaunda, in a place that disregarded his wishes, had already taken place. The critical point, Peter, is that since the courts never examined the merits of the decision that the government had taken, that outcome meant that there was no judgment in the Kaunda case that could serve as a precedent. Because all the Kaunda family did was simply to ask for permission to say, can you allow us to review the decision of the government so that the issue of who has ultimate responsibility over the body and funeral of former president can be ventilated upon in court. So the judicial review, if it had taken place, would have resulted in either being set aside or upheld. So there's no case law on that point that could be used. And there's also currently at least no written law that empowers the government to conduct a funeral for a former president. And that explains why the Attorney General himself, even in court, has not cited any statute which gives the government the authority over a former president's funeral or body. So the counter case there is misplaced, and the Attorney General knows that very well, as well as the fact that there's no written law that empowers the state to have the final say.
Doc, as we bring this to a close, what impact could this dispute have on the 2026 elections?
Well, whatever way the dispute is resolved, in my view, it will have a significant bearing on the 2026 elections. You know, the governing party, I think, key reason the government, in my view, is to reduce the political cost of burying Lungu in exile. If the former president is buried in South Africa, the issue of Lungu's burial location is likely to feature prominently in the political campaigns ahead of next year's general election. His rivals, could promise voters that they would exhume Lungu's remains and bring them to Zambia for burial if the person who made it impossible for the former president to be buried at home was voted out. By initiating the court action, Hichilema is probably hoping that he could undermine the effectiveness of such political messages by claiming that, look, I tried all that I could do to bring Lungu's remains to Zambia, and I was only prevented by the South African courts. If the court action succeeds, HH's administration violated the Lungu's right to travel abroad for medical treatment, and the logical conclusion is what happened, which is death. He can then try to cleanse himself of that record by showing care for him in death that he did not show when Lungu was alive.
Doc, we'd like to thank you very much for speaking to us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, there you have it. That's Dr. Sishuwa. He is a historian and senior lecturer at South Africa's Stellenbosch University, speaking to us right here on the Red Hot Breakfast.